Lawson and her friends, and they are also volunteers with the Company A, 3rd Maine Regiment Volunteer Infantry, right? And it's a nonprofit educational and a living history organization, and they go from place to place. They do a lot with schools. They do a lot of reenactments, and during the reenactments, the website explains that the women, their main responsibility at that point, apart from teaching, is making sure that the volunteer men are well cared for and in the heat that they get lots to drink and that sort of thing. But I was very fascinated when I started looking at the website, and I was very naive and didn't realize how much women were really involved in the Civil War, and I thought this would be a very interesting topic for others to learn about as well. Carolyn has a degree in chemical engineering, and she's an assistant in instruction at Bates College, and she's particularly interested in structure and function relationships, and she teaches cellular and molecular biology and animal physiology. So everything gets way above my head.
So this has absolutely nothing to do with any of this presentation.
And interested to hear what you folks have to share with us.
Thank you very much. My two friends. This is Mrs. Sillick, also known as my Auntie Marsha. And this is my friend, Mrs. Pierce. Now, I've introduced them this way for a reason, because one of the things I want to talk about is in the Victorian age, everything was a bit more formal than we probably would be used to, including the fact that adults did not address each other in public by their first names. That was restricted to family. So, since Aunt Marcia is part of my family, I could call her that. But even my husband, I would say Captain Lawson or Mr. Lawson. His father, of course, is Mr. Lawson, the elder. At any rate, I want to talk about mostly women's clothing. And that's because this is one of the most visible things you can see if you look at photographs of the time period. Photography is a wonderful thing. We didn't have it for any other war and prior to the Civil War, and it gives us great insight into what was really going on at the time. It trivializes the whole women's experience in the Civil War a little bit to simply talk about their clothing. So given that today is in between the traditional Memorial Day celebration on the 30th and the modern celebration of Memorial Day, which happens to be on the last Monday, I thought first of all I would come in full mourning. A lady who lost her husband was supposed to, by custom, stay in mourning for a full year after his death. Men had it a lot easier and were asked to stay in full mourning only 90 days. Full mourning requires black from head to toe. In public, in the first 6 months of your mourning, it would require what was called a weeper veil. I'm not going to put the bonnet on because I spend a lot of time in my hair. But a weeper comes below the waist and would shield you from the public gaze during your initial period of mourning. After your first year, you could add colors, such as they are. You could add gray and lavender to your wardrobe. You could start wearing white at collars and cuffs. And eventually, after 18 months, you could come out of mourning. I wanted to mention this because of Memorial Day and because of something a friend sent me. Let's see if we can get these focused. So, Next to an old meeting house in Woolwich, Maine, is a quiet graveyard dating from the 18th century. In the back of the yard is the resting place of the Dodge family. Mr. and Mrs. Dodge had several children, all of whom died very young. The only one who reached adulthood was Stephen. He was one of the boys of 61, and he lies there now, killed at Chantilly in 1862. He was a member of D Company, the 3rd Maine Infantry. His father lived only until 1865, dying at the age of 67. Stephen's mother was alone with her memories when she died in 1875. The cost of war is not just borne by soldiers. It's become popular to refer to all of our military as heroes and patriots. But what then do we call their families? And what do we call Mrs. Dodge? So on that rather depressing note, let me go on and talk some more about clothing. During the Civil War, Queen Victoria was on the throne in England, and fashions were set by the Queen. Everyone wanted to look like Queen Victoria. Now, Victoria was on the throne for many years, and when you see fashions marked as Victorian, they can span a period of almost 60 years. So I'm going to talk about this kind of middle Victorian period, the 1860s. A Victorian lady would never have appeared in public less than fully dressed. Therefore, to show you the foundation garments that gives the whole silhouette the unique look, I'm going to show you Jezebel, who is a shameless woman and will allow you to see her undergarments. Jezebel would start her day in a garment that was called a wrapper. This is kind of the all-purpose bathrobe. It was considered dressed enough that you could receive people, company, while wearing this. They were made wide enough so you could actually get a fashionable hoop underneath it if you suddenly had a call from, say, the minister. I'm going to take off Jezzy's wrapper here. Which is sopping wet. You put it this way. Yeah, don't get it in Miss Pants. And start with her first garment of the day. She would first put on something called her chemise. This is an all-purpose undergarment. Ladies own quite a few of them. They made them themselves. White cotton so they could be washed, oiled, and bleached to get them white again. Jezzy, depending on how much money she had, might have also worn this as her nightgown. Now, one of the first things you're going to notice is the problem I'm having here, which is the garments are cut differently than what you would expect. That's because of the ideal of feminine beauty. In 1860, a beautiful woman had a round face, a long swan-like neck, narrow, sloping shoulders, a tiny waist, small hands, small feet, and we don't really talk about the other bits. To get this sloping shoulder look, all of the dresses and all the garments are cut way down off the shoulder. And that starts all the way with the undergarments. The next thing she's going to put on is her underdrawers. These are cut a little different than perhaps you're used to. But we'll talk about that in a little while. So, there are two schools of thought among reenactors. Some reenactors are tuckers. Some reenactors pull the chemise over the top. Personally, I think the ladies probably wore the chemise over the top. I swore when I started reenacting I'd never wear a garment like this. And within 2 years, I found out exactly what the reason was. So, her next garment, and this is probably starting to deviate quite a bit from what you might do in dressing in the morning, is her stockings. Stockings are long, usually long enough to go up over the knee, and they're held up by simple garters. Do these really hold those stockings up? No. But they do a good enough job that most ladies could get through the day with those kind of garters. Next, she's going to put on her shoes. To go out in the world where the major type of transportation is on horseback or by wagon calls for boots because the roads are littered with, let's say, horse apples. So, a lady going to town needs boots. I think all the ladies here ended up, yes. If she was going to stay indoors, she might simply wear a pair of slippers. Most indoor shoes the lady made herself. There are even books. There's one called Every Woman Her Own Shoemaker. So that you didn't have to waste money on shoes that you weren't going to wear outside of the house. Now the reason the order here is important is in part the next garment here. This is one of the defining garments of the age. This is a corset, a boned corset. The boning, the stiffening, is spring steel. Okay, it's not whalebone. They call them bones still, but we'd already exterminated most of the right humpbacks where you got this boning. And the front closes with steel busk. This is to give you this lovely narrow waist that was so fashionable. The front closure means that every lady can dress herself. In fact, if you're looking at an antique store and you find some tiny weeny little clothing and you're trying to think, was that a really small woman or was that a child? Check to see where it closes. Women had to dress themselves. Children were dressed like their parents and could have closures in the back. How many folks, you're all the right age for this, thank goodness, how many folks have seen Gone with the Wind? All right, in Gone with the Wind, Scarlett says that the reason she's so popular with the boys is that she has the only 18-inch waist in the county. So, is everyone familiar with this object? Would you do me a favor and measure the circumference of that? How big is it round? There we are.
18 inches.
18 inches. So, if Scarlett was not a fictional character and actually did have an 18-inch waist, that's how big her waist was. Now, did most of the ladies have waists this small? Of course not. Remember, she was from a wealthy family. She did nothing useful with her life except torment her would-be beaux. Other people had to work for a living. They had to get things done. So what she was doing was called tight lacing, where someone actually pulls on to get those laces tight as possible. This is done only by people who have nothing else to do with their lives. Tight lacing would be unusual at the time as dressing like the woman on the cover of Cosmo would be now. You don't see the average person like that. When you look at the photographs, they're not all wasp-laced. Over the corset goes a corset cover. Now I said that all those pieces are steel. They're going to rust. They're going to potentially rub on the fabric of the dress. And you want to protect that fabric. Fabric then cost about the same as it does now, but it was only 36 inches wide instead of 45. And remember, your husband, the private in the U.S. Army, was only making $13 a month. So it would take his entire paycheck for 2 months to buy you enough fabric for a new dress. So you protect that dress. Wear a corset cover. Now, forgot to mention, remember she put on her shoes? That's because once you got the corset on, getting to the shoes isn't as easy. So you put them on first. I can still get to my shoes, but it's not fun. And you know the lady dropping a handkerchief for a gentleman to pick up? It came from this era, since picking it up isn't just bending over. It requires stooping down like this. So, her next garment is the first petticoat. When I do this in schools, I usually have the boys count how many pieces of clothing I put on Jezebel. Since they're not as interested in the clothing themselves, it gives them something to do. The modesty petticoat is to protect the lady from exhibiting a view of her lower limbs. Also, remember the cut of those underdrawers. You don't want the chance that the wind picks up your skirt. So an under petticoat is cut much closer to the body and usually is the one with the fanciest trims. It's what people are going to see if you lift your skirt to step up into a carriage. Next comes the second defining garment of the 1860s. This is a hoop skirt, or a cage crinoline. This is a marvelous new invention. There are dozens of patents for cages. And it allowed you to have a beautiful full skirt. Why do you want your skirt full? Well, first of all, because Queen Victoria's daughters wore their skirts that way. And second, it's all a fool of the eye, ladies. The wider the skirt, the narrower the waist looks. Before the invention of the hoop, ladies would wear maybe 6, 7 starched petticoats under their dress to try to get that full silhouette. On a rainy day like today, this becomes very awkward. On a hot day, you have all those layers of fabric over your limbs, excuse me, and really cut down in your mobility. And I don't even want to think about laundry day. So, modern invention, a wonderful thing. Every lady owned a hoop. The hoop bones, again, they're called, are again spring steel. So, guess what we're going to do with the spring steel? We're going to cover it. For the same reason that you're wearing a corset cover, you're going to wear an over petticoat. The over petticoat will protect the skirt of the dress from rubbing on the bones. It smooths out the lines so you can't see the bones. And it provides that extra layer of protection. In really bad weather, you will see photographs of ladies who are wearing a very fancy over petticoat and using what are called skirt lifters, which are just like the cords in Venetian blinds, but let them pull their dress up out of the way. And it would show the petticoat without showing their lower limbs. All right, we're finally up to something that people would see if you walk out. Dresses, again, were cut to give that beautiful silhouette, right? Sloping shoulders. I didn't really talk about the shape up here. The bosom was supposed to be generally round. The combination of wearing a chemise with a corset underneath, pull the chemise down tight, gives you this kind of generally round appearance. There's never two of anything up here. The Victorian word is bosom, and it's singular. You got one. The dress is darted to come in and fit snug at the waist. Most ladies' dresses closed with hooks and eyes, partly because buttons were more expensive than you would think, even more than they are now. And second, because all buttonholes had to be sewn by hand. So imagine how many you want on your dress. Sleeves. Wide, wide sleeves. This is, again, full the eye. The wider the sleeve, the smaller your hands will look. This is a style called the pagoda. And it calls for something called undersleeves. Mrs. Sillick is also wearing pagoda sleeves with undersleeves. So they're completely separate. You can remove them, wash them separately, even though you may never wash your dress. The same thing with the collar. Usually a collar, like my friend Mrs. Pierce, is completely separate and is tacked onto the dress to protect it from the oils of the neck and let you take it off, wash it, and put it back on. Now I said that's because she may never wash her dress. I'm not kidding. There were no dry cleaners. So you cannot wash silk. This is a silk dress. You cannot wash wool. There were recipes in ladies' magazines on how to clean these things with spirits of naphtha. Essentially doing dry cleaning. Doing that at home is a good way to kill yourself. And a lot of ladies did die in accidental fires trying to clean or do stain removal with things like spirits of naphtha. So, dresses are lined, again, to protect that outer fabric. And if you had to, you could replace the lining without replacing the outside of the dress. So, okay, she's dressed to stay home. If Jezebel is going out, she's going to need a bonnet. Stay on. Or a hat. This is in part a fashion statement, and in part it's an effort to protect your skin from the sun. Every lady wanted a milky white complexion. The fairer the skin, the better. Everybody know why? Well, Queen Victoria had a very pale complexion, and that's because she was rich. So, rich people didn't have to go outside and do their laundry. They didn't have to go outside and work in the garden. They didn't have to walk anywhere. They got to ride in a closed carriage. They were therefore very pale. Modern society has turned this whole ideal upside down, because now you want a tan. Because if you got tan in February, it meant that you had the money to go to Bermuda. Rich people have tans now. And poor people have to work indoors in an office or a classroom and don't get to get a tan. So every lady wanted to be fair. You wore hats or bonnets outside to try to protect your skin. It is well known that getting a chill is what causes disease. So no lady would leave the house without some kind of a wrap. Usually a shawl, though coats with actual sleeves were coming into fashion. A lady wears gloves in public. This had two purposes. Again, you're protecting your hands so you didn't get a tan on the backs of your hands. Second of all, it was something that was done in polite society. You never touched another adult with your bare hands. So men wore gloves, women wore gloves, and most whoever touched was glove to glove. And last, she has her bag, called a reticule. It can be very, very small, because it only has to carry perhaps a few coins, maybe a handkerchief or a couple of calling cards. Probably not too many coins, given that in the 1860s, women could not own property in their own right. So her husband actually owned everything except the clothes she was standing in. All those women who worked in the mills in all the towns up here were not allowed to collect their own pay. Their husband would go, or their father would go once a week and collect their pay. They wouldn't give it to the women themselves. So you really don't need to carry a lot of money. And of course, no cell phones or any of those other things that we have to carry now. I'd like to show you a couple of variations on this basic clothing on my friends here. So I'm going to make, first of all, my Auntie Marcia. So this dress, while silk, and is probably the best one that this woman owns, it is fairly plain, and we only know that she has a good bit of money because it's a big, big pattern. If you sew, you know that to match big patterns requires more fabric. Therefore, you're wasting something. You've got money to waste. Auntie Marcia, on the other hand, must have a fair amount of income because of the style dress she has on. The little back with the extra buttons was in imitation of the military uniform. Very fashionable at the time. And it's cut low enough that Auntie Marcia is probably going to tea. So ladies wear a neckline all the way up until 4 p.m. After 4, you may wear a neckline cut down at most 4 inches below your collarbones. So Auntie Marcia must be going to tea, a woman of leisure. Of course. She also has the money to afford a watch. This was considered fairly frivolous for a woman to have a watch. Men needed it, of course, because they were out in the world of commerce. But women wouldn't be considered to have needed one. The exception being the professional nurses that arose during the Civil War. She has on her gloves to be going out, and hair dressed up and in a hairnet. So this is another sign. If you look at photographs at the time and you wonder, boy, that woman looks really young. You can get some idea of her age by whether her hair is worn up or down. A girl wore her hair down, just free or in something like braids, until her father judged her old enough to be courted by men. It was the signal to the neighborhood boys that they come courting once her hair was allowed to be put up. So, check out the hair. If they put it up, she's probably at least 15 years old. At least. Maybe not in Norway. Maybe not in Lewiston. Excuse me just a moment.
Were they taxed for their watches like men were during the revenue? Were they taxed for their watches like the men were during
No. So women were not legal entities. I say that she can afford a watch, but she can't. Her husband can afford that watch. So all taxes were on men because women did not constitute a legal entity to be taxed.
A watch would have been taxed.
during that 61, 62?
Interesting.
So my friend Mrs. Pierce is wearing a variation. It's again cut very much like the other dress, but this is more practical. There is nothing you can do practical in sleeves as wide as this. This is my dress, and I'll tell you that. It's a rich do-nothing dress. Because you can't eat, you can't cook, you can't do anything.
You may embroider.
I might embroider something, yes. The closed bishop sleeves with a removable cuff, much more practical.
I button them to baste.
Push them up out of the way. Keep them out of what she's working on. The dress is cotton, which means she can wash it, which allows her to do some more practical things. She's still not going to wear this to do laundry, to do cooking, to do heavy cleaning around the house because of the hoop. This is another good way that women died by fire, is to get too close to the stove while wearing a hoop. So if you're cooking, you wore what's called a corded petticoat, just a little petticoat underneath that kept the skirt away from your legs but didn't stick out as wide as a hoop. I believe I've seen you wear that without a hoop before.
Yes, you have.
Yes. Mrs. Pierce has her shawl, wool of course, and again, her hair is up and covered in a net to keep it neat. Neat was much more important than clean. She's got her gloves on, and she has what we jokingly call a haversack, her sack, which is the equivalent of one of the men's haversacks, showing that Mrs. Pierce has to do something more than just go into town and do a little shopping. She needs to carry enough with her that she could do something useful. So that might contain her knitting, it might contain something she needs to sell in town, but in any case, she needs to be more practical than Jezebel here does. One thing I did want to point out also was the cameo. Lots and lots of cameos during the period. A cameo, most of the really fine ones came from Italy. So, having a cameo meant that you or someone in your family had enough money to have traveled to Europe. So again, all these fashions are actually just signals of wealth. I think that's everything.
How many outfits would the average person have in their wardrobe?
Oh, well, the average person probably had about 4 dresses. So you probably had an everyday and a best, and then you had some mostly weather related. So you might have a very thin cotton dress for the real heat of summer and a heavier linen or wool dress for the real depth of winter. But you had only one best. And then your other one was probably sort of best. It was something that you could have visitors come and wear in your own home, or make that quick trip into town to sell your eggs or your butter.
By this time, would they have gone out of the idea of having a garment that would be adjustable to lay them out in?
The adjustable women's garment at the time wasn't necessarily for laying them out, it was for childbearing.
Yeah. I know
So-
some are for laying them out too.
Ladies, married ladies, of course, were pregnant a lot. It wasn't unusual for a woman to have 8, 10 pregnancies, or even more. They lost most of the children either before birth or shortly thereafter. In the 1860s, if you survived your first year, you had a good chance to live as long as we do. But you had to get past that first year, and a lot of babies didn't. While we can talk about Jezebel's drawers and the purpose of those, so the purpose of those, if you haven't put it together yet, is that when she experiences the call of nature and needs to go use the necessary out back to get down to the layer to remove those drawers is almost impossible. Therefore, they're split all the way around. How can we put this? You take a rather wide stance. You separate the 2 parts of the drawers and pee or whatever right through the middle of the garment, the opening.
Women, what a blessing they can, without undressing.
This is embarrassing. I love this discussion with the school kids because they usually can't keep a straight face while I'm talking about going to the bathroom. But at the time, inquiring about someone's bowel movements was considered polite conversation. You might meet someone in church and say, "Oh, you've been sick. How is the condition of your bowel?" And it's okay. You can tell someone you had diarrhea all last night. But we do not discuss becoming pregnant. So again, tips for if you're looking at period photographs. If you see a photograph of a woman, she's got a shawl. It's got to be bigger than the one I've got here. And she's got it crossed in front of her with her arms like this. She's hiding the baby bump. You would not want to appear pregnant when you had your photo made. Ladies went to a lot of lengths to hide the fact that they were in a family way. They also didn't have a dress. There was no maternity dress. So the dresses were cut. Is yours a gathered front or a, forget? No, pleated. There's an alternate style that instead of being darted here, it's gathered into the waistband. And that would be gathered on a series of drawstrings. So you could slowly let it out. And then after you delivered of the child, you could pull it back in and keep wearing the same dress.
Did women spend the last couple of months at home? that you
Mostly
go
at
out?
home,
Yeah.
for many, many reasons. I mean, part of it is the not being seen in public while very pregnant. You can't hide them any longer. But part of it was getting out in public, getting to town, for instance, called for you to either ride in a carriage or a wagon, which may or may not have springs, or walk. And nobody in that condition really wanted to walk the mile and a half to town for anything trivial.
Were upper class women selling their cast-off gowns to lower class women yet?
Yes, there was a very active trade in used clothing. So if it was still usable, you could sell it, and the woman who bought it would simply recut it to fit her. Obviously, from the way the clothing fits, they all have to be custom fit to you. But most women could do that on their own. If the clothing was no longer wearable, you would sell it to a rag picker. Rags were bleached, chopped into fine bits, and were used in paper. So rags were actually worth money, but how unwearable the clothing is. You find very few cotton dresses in an antique store. You find some silk, you find some wool. But you see, the cotton ones could be cut down for children. They could be cut into towels, they could be made into all kinds of things. Where the silk you probably had packed away, that was your best. And the wool isn't nearly as versatile as to what you could use it for. Sometimes you'll find only the bodice, because there's about 4 yards of fabric here. And most of the housewives looked at that and said, wow, that'll make 2 children's dresses.
Most of the clothing seems to be for urban dwellers. Whatever in the world did the farmers' wives do?
Oh,
Is there
farmers' wives wanted to dress like this. They didn't have the money. So their variation looks a bit more like Mrs. Pierce. They're sticking with cottons and wools. Wool was inexpensive up here. Cotton, strangely enough, was inexpensive up here because this is where it was woven. They probably were down to 2 dresses, maybe 3, rather than the kind of average-ish 4 I was talking about. They might have been cast-offs from someone else. Churches would be the place where people would bring their used clothing to be given to people less well off. And you don't see pictures of these folks. And it's not because they were embarrassed to be seen. They didn't have the money to have a picture made. There's a museum in Yarmouth that has a lady's work dress. It's one of the few I've ever seen in a museum collection. It's linen, completely linen. And I pity the woman who had to wear that thing because it's stiff as a board. But it would have worn like iron. And that's what you wore out on the farm. You got to get the dress higher. Forget the heels on the shoes.
get the hoop?
The ladies probably had a hoop, but they didn't wear it around the farm. Anyone could make yourself a hoop. So if you wanted to go into town and look just as fashionable as those ladies in the Peterson's Ladies Magazine, you get an old petticoat and you get a piece of reed and you sew a casing and slip the reed into the bottom of your petticoat, and now you can go to town wearing a hoop as well. So hoops were the ideal. You might only own one chemise, but you probably had a hoop of some sort. By the way, someone who doesn't even have a single chemise is just shiftless.
I'm surprised in, say in Hebron, they used to have in the early part of the war, they had the soldiers' relief corps, you know, where the women and men both belonged. But I find time that they faded out in '62. And so I thought to myself, I said, well, that's kind of weird, it's right in the middle of war. But they evidently used up all their extra cotton and stuff from the home quarters, and like you say, the price of wool and other stuff was so high they didn't have that. That's why the governor later in the war tried to reinstate.
Yeah, the Women's Relief Corps did persist in Maine, as did the Maine Camp Hospital Association, another soldiers' relief organization,
Right.
and branches of the U.S. Sanitary Commission.
Right.
Towns like Portland had active sanitary commission fairs all through the end of the war. Fabric, fortunes were made. So Mr. Bates, Mr. Bates, people called him insane because before the war, he stocked up on raw cotton at an exorbitant price, much higher than other people were paying for cotton. And people said, you're gonna lose your shirt. And he made a fortune making canvas for the army. So cotton fabric became very, very expensive as the war went on. And you'll see, if you look at, again, photographs of the period, we can all now date photographs sometimes down to the year, because at the end of the 1850s, skirts often had multiple flounces and ruffles and all kinds of extra fabric. And by the end of the war, they were narrower and no more extra flounces and stuff. It was just too expensive to have that kind of dress. That continued in the 1870s. The hoop became oval, then the front flattened, then you got bustle, and pretty soon you can tell that you're now up to the 1880s and the fashions have completely changed.
So how long would their dress last?
Oh, a long time. Your best dress you probably kept most of your life. So you made it perhaps for your wedding, and you simply remade it as the fashions changed. So luckily, you might have made something during the period when the sleeves were very wide, and you had all that extra fabric to work with as you went through. So the fashions became narrower and narrower. They would be recut to change the shoulders. They even would take apart the skirt, and if the bottom part was worn, you would do what's called turning the skirt. So you take it apart, you turn it inside out and upside down, and you put that worn part in the waistband. So many women had the same best dress their whole life. For mourning, the average person, if they wanted to try to do mourning the way the Victorians thought, simply dyed one of their dresses black. So you didn't have to like get a new dress. You just took one of your dresses, you dyed it black, and that's what
Colors. Were there colors for older women and colors for younger women?
Yes and no. So, aniline dyes, chemical dyes, were invented in the 1850s. They allowed these, what we would think of as actually eye-blindingly bright colors for the first time ever. And therefore, they were in fashion for the very highest fashion tier. So, for instance, the first color available was mauve. The second color was this absolutely eye-blinding lime green, followed by a very, very bright yellow, and last of all, like traffic cone orange. High society women might have at least one garment in one of these brand new colors. They might have an outfit in all of them because you didn't have to match. So you could have a green dress, an orange bonnet, and a yellow shawl. In general, older women wore darker colors. It was both considered more appropriate for a young girl to wear light pinks and pale blues and so forth. And it's just practical that as you get to be an adult, you're not going to outgrow the clothing anymore. So you need something that isn't going to show the stains. So the exception to this is if you actually were in the social class and had the kind of money to own a ball gown. Ball gowns are almost always pale colored. And that's because in a room lit only by candlelight, if you're wearing a dark dress, you look just like a floating head. You know? So lighter colors, if you really had that kind of money. Most women didn't own a ball gown. I think we all do because we just want it.
About when did cotton fabric become fairly accessible and fairly common in this part of the country?
Oh, when industrial espionage made it possible for the cotton mills to be founded in the United States, as opposed to it having to come from England.
But still, was it then available? I'm under the impression that cotton wasn't. There would have been wool and linen up until the 40s or something like that.
Pretty much, yeah. That's about the right timing.
Yeah.
Before that, cotton fabric had to be imported. But as I said, it actually was industrial espionage. Somebody stole.
They stole the looms. They stole the patents for the looms. Yeah.
To leave cotton.
Yeah.
You said that everybody wore gloves. You couldn't
You
touch
work-
hand to hand. So your fingers are cut off your gloves because you're doing practical work.
Right.
Yes, okay.
Right.
Crochet,
It's also an age. So the fingerless mitts is a slightly older fashion. They were wearing them all the way back in the 1820s. As a lady of middle mature years, I tend to cling to fashions that were in style when I was a younger woman. I wouldn't speak to my friends' ages, of course.
I know.
I'm older.
I cling to the youth too.
Yes, everyone does this. If you ever notice, people tend to wear the hairstyle that often was popular when they were a younger woman and not pick up new hairstyles. The same with the caps. An older lady wore a cap, young women did not. Some young women were even wearing fringe, bangs over their foreheads.
What's this school coming to?
Obviously fast.
Now, later, as I understand it, there were women who actually had their lower ribs pulled so they could get the hourglass figure. This is not really an hourglass figure.
This is not the hourglass. So by mid to late 1870s, so about 10 years later, you see the corset shape changed. So right now, in the 1860s, all the waists are actually rather high compared to, well, when we have young women try to dress, they all keep trying to put this waist like down here. It's actually above your natural waist in the 1860s. By the mid-1870s, it moved to your natural waist, and not only that, but you didn't have this fullness below it. It was actually shaped here. And now they were going for that hourglass. I don't think I'd like to wear the corsets that they had then. If you look at the pictures, I have a whole book of corsets through the ages. The corsets now ran all the way, well, this one comes from here to about there. Because you don't really care the shape beneath this. The long corsets would come from here almost all the way to your hip belts. And now they were going for that hourglass. And sure, they've always been crazy people. They're crazy people now who do, you know, they do surgery to get a fuller butt and, or, you know, tummy tucks, and they've always been crazy people. Yeah, to look better in sandals, and a toe tuck. Yeah, you don't want your middle toe to be longer than your big toe, so people actually have it trimmed.
I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
My grandfather did that with an axe.
How far ahead he was. Other questions? I do answer anything I know, and if I don't know it, I'll make it up.
Where did you all get your dresses?
I make all my own clothes, so the things that Jezebel is wearing and what I'm wearing, I made.
One of the other gals in the unit made my dress in like a week.
So what is the unit?
The third Maine.
Third Maine.
That's true of mine as well. Someone else in the unit made it.
All
We'll
this
get them
clothing,
sewing someday soon.
all this clothing looks very hot. What did they, there must have been some kind of variation for very hot weather.
Yes. So the thing that changes for the temperature is the fabric. I didn't bring one, but there's something called sheer dress, where it was perfectly acceptable to wear a dress, but the fabric was so sheer that you could actually see all the underpinnings underneath it. Of course, you're wearing all those layers, so nobody actually saw anything. But you simply overlooked the fact as long as there was a dress there. For very hot weather. For very cold weather, generally you didn't have a heavier dress. What you do is start putting things like wool petticoats on underneath. They have knitted drawers. The sweaters at the time were so tight that you were supposed to put it under your dress. So this was pretty normal. Homes weren't, no central heating. So it was almost as cold in your house as it was outside. And so to go around every day wearing shawls and everything was very inconvenient. So you actually put the layers on under your clothes.
So you stayed just
They're not as hot as you think. The number one question to any Civil War reenactor is, aren't you hot in that? And the answer is, well, of course, it's no cooler in here than it is out there. But as long as you have the layers consisting entirely of natural fibers, it's not that bad. The guys wear wool. The uniforms were even wool shirts, though the guys usually want cotton shirts from home. And then wool trousers and a wool jacket. And we had a person, another reenacting unit I was in, who was a Biddeford policeman. And he said on a hot day he'd rather be wearing that wool uniform than his police uniform because it was no iron, so it had a lot of polyester in it. And he said it was like walking around in a big plastic bag. So, yeah, if you're looking for reenactors, look in the shade. We're not stupid. Ladies carry parasols, portable shade. You do what we now call, you walk southern. Okay. Northerners walk way too fast. People in the South have known for years how to deal with heat. You walk southern. There's no need to get anywhere fast. It's hot.
I said that years ago.
And a lot of people didn't live there. All population centers. went to the reenactment of the 150th anniversary of First School Run in Manassas, Virginia last year. And it was my first reenactment because I'm new to this. And certainly my first Southern one. I was fully garbed. And I had gone down with severe concerns, and it was 107 to 110 most of the time that we were there in Newman. And many of the people who came to observe the battle reenactment and so forth were in modern garb. Of the ladies might wear a tank top and shorts and open-toed sandals. And I looked at them and said, I was much happier wearing what I was wearing.
Interesting.
Because they had the hot sun beating on their skin, and there was no breeze, so it didn't help that they were not covered. Whereas I was fully protected. Walking creates a little bit of a breeze, and I was really, as long as I did not exert myself, not in bad shape and quite shocked about it. I have to say. And I'm a firm believer now in hats. Ladies always wore hats. On a hot day, nothing keeps you cooler than a hat.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
I have a bonnet here that would be more a farm woman, a lower class person, might work outside wearing it or something. And rather than these lovely structured bonnets, it's basically to protect your neck and your face.
Right. Cool.
And it's cotton, and I'm completely protected.
Wonderful.
It is a little like living in a tunnel.
Yes.
Definitely. Well, I mean, you really have to see what's going on around you. You could, oops, my scarf came off. You could turn it back, but then your face wouldn't be protected, so it would be coming right back.
Yeah.
Pin my
Pretty cool.
net on. So that's.
Very nice.
Anything else?
I'm curious how you became involved in Civil War reenactment.
Okay, I'll start. My husband and I had always loved reading about and learning about history. And so on one trip, we actually stopped at the Gettysburg battlefield. And there was a man there who was a Civil War reenactor who was doing what's called a first-person impression. So he stayed in character of the person that he had adopted. And he was a Union surgeon who had stayed behind with the wounded after the Battle of Gettysburg. And he had picked a date that was about 2 weeks after the battle. And could tell you that the #1 issue at the time was not supplies for the wounded, because the trains had started getting quite a few supplies to him. It was the smell of the rotting horses on the battlefield. And he had living details of things that once he said it, it was, oh my goodness, that was what it was like. I never even considered that. And we were very, very impressed. Then I dragged my husband to the Portland Flower Show. And outside of the flower show, down there in the old port, is a man in a Civil War uniform with a musket. I said, don't you want to go talk to him? So he did. He went to their next meeting. 1 month later, he had an entire kit, including uniform and gun. And I was like, well, okay. I'll give him a year. He'll grow out of it. And after a year, when he didn't grow out of it, I figured, well, might as well join up. I do have the option, as a woman, to impersonate a man. There are 400 documented cases of women enlisting in the Union Army. We don't know how many there were in the Confederate Army because the records were destroyed when they burned Richmond. But I could have dressed as a man and stood there with a musket, but have you lifted one of these things? Yeah. I would much rather wear the corset than carry the musket.
And you?
So then you don't get to shoot. I don't get to shoot with anybody young.
And the other ladies?
I started out with the family genealogy, and I ran across a great-great-grandfather that I couldn't find records on. So we went to the archives, my husband and I went to the archives, and we found his induction papers for the Civil War up there. And, you know, I've always enjoyed history, so again, it wasn't the flower show for us, it was the Augusta Gun Show. And my husband had gone, and he came home and said, "You're not going to believe what I found up there." And it was a month, and we had everything.
You know what you got them when they put all the orders in the first month. I was a little more convoluted. My father has always been a student of history, and possibly because he was so much closer to it, at least in part. He was born in 1912, and his grandfather enlisted at the age of 17 in the Civil War, and so he heard firsthand. His grandfather lived with him and died in the 30s, and told him some stories, not a great many. Like most soldiers, he didn't talk a lot about the horrors of war, but he talked about a few things, like he wrote the caisson, which is not a fun thing. But I always heard those stories, and it was really interesting. We do a little genealogy as well. My brother's a history teacher. So there's a lot of history in my family, and I enjoy it. And then some years ago, I met my husband, who had always wanted to be a living historian, but had not been able to because of the work he did and the expense of it while raising children. And so we finally got together, and both found we had an interest in history. And he's also a hunter and loves his guns, and started getting interested in black powder, which led him to the Civil War Enfield and 1863 Spring, 54 Springfield, or whatever year that is. And started getting interested in that, and then we met some people that were doing it, and really he felt he wanted to pursue it. He had the opportunity, and we looked it up and found the Third Maine online and got to a meeting. They showed up at it. Yeah. Lord help them, they showed up at our annual business meeting. Wow. 2 hours of business. And right there they said, well, these people might be okay. They might be really serious if they're willing to sit through our annual business meeting. And we are signed up on the spot. Yeah, we are a registered nonprofit, so we have to.
How many are there of you?
Right now, I think on paper we have 40-some members. There's the military, the civilian groups, and then we have a fife and drum group. And have you ever thought of, would you like to play the fife? Our fifers and drummers keep aging out, so they go off to college and they don't come back.
They have a fabulous website. If you just Google, I think I just Googled like Third Maine, you'll find their website.
Oh.
No, you're right. I have Company A, because Company M with Nichols with our website on it.
Oh, good job.
You can see our event calendar. We have a living history event in Wyndham.
June 23rd.
Yeah, third weekend in June. Then we're in Fort Knox in July, and Hinckley in August. So we've got a lot of Maine events this year, which is not all that usual.
Very interesting.
We also do school programs, parades. Yeah, school programs are free. Parades, well, depends.
If you go to the website, I should have mentioned, and I'm sorry I didn't at the beginning, but they are this group is really well respected and well known, and held in very high regard for what they do.
Yeah, we have authenticity standards that you have to meet.
That's a little more bigger.
I've always directed drama in high school, and of course some of the plays that students love to do, and Little Women, but they all sit like this. You know?
Nobody asked, how do you sit down?
Yes.
Carefully, carefully. Should you demonstrate, Mrs. Sillick?
Yeah.
So you back into the chair until you can make sure your skirt is pulled forward, and then you sit
Just
down.
goes down, it doesn't go boinging up.
So that's the whole thing to teach.
Yeah. But yes, a lady was supposed to, first of all, have wonderful posture, which is tough in a corset.
They wouldn't be crossing their legs
No.
like that.
No,
No.
can't be done. You simply can't do it.
Probably wasn't even ladylike at that time either.
No.
Well, it
They
wasn't.
didn't wear all of this.
Yeah, it wasn't ladylike, but it's not possible in this clothing. There are certain motions are simply not possible.
How did you drive over?
One thing is getting your hands up over your head. Not possible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I got a
And I
stick.
don't, I don't have a stick, I don't know.
I always feared that someday on the turnpike I'm going to be stopped by a state trooper.
And he's gonna
I'm going to come up to the window and see that, this dress is all up like this over one shoulder. And
then take it out of the vehicle.
yeah, get out of the vehicle.
Pretty good, very nice.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.